So welcome everybody to September's Word Up online on Zoom. We have Word Up acknowledge that some of us are situated on the traditional land of the Anishinaabe and Huron-Wendat people. Word Up is dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture and are committed to moving forward in the spirit of reconciliation and respect with all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. So tonight we have Rosanna, Micelotta, Battigelli, and Robertson. So Rosanna was born in Calabria, Italy, and immigrated to Canada with her family at the age of 3. She is former award-winning teacher and is a member and past president of the Sudbury Writers Guild. Rosanna is an alumna of the Humber School for Writers and a professional member of the Writers Union of Canada, the Canadian Authors Association, the Association of Italian Canadian Writers, and the Canadian Society of Children's Authors, Illustrators, and Performers. Her work has been published in 17 anthologies and she has read at conferences and literary festivals in Sudbury, Toronto, Peterborough, Montreal, Vancouver, New York, and in Italy. Her novel, La Brigantessa, see if I can speak. Brigantessa, thank you. The one that I practice, I can't say. La Brigantessa won gold for historical fiction in the 2019 Independent Publisher Book Awards and was a finalist for the 2019 Canadian Authors Association Fred Kerner Book Award and the 2019 Northern Lit Award. She is published with Pajama Press and Harlequin UK. She's got 3 books and 3 forthcoming. Pigeon Soup and Other Stories will be released by Inanna Publications in 2021. So everybody, Rosanna.
Thank you, Linda, and thanks to all of you for being here today. Also, thanks to Colleen and Aaron for your part in organizing this. I appreciate the opportunity. I'll be reading from La Brigantessa, and I can't help but say things with an Italian pronunciation. And this book is set in Calabria, southern Italy, in 1862. In 1861, Italy was unified, and it was a very traumatic period that followed. Turbulent period, and a lot of the Southerners who were peasants were rebelling against the northern-based government because of the harsh policies, tax policies that it was imposing upon all the regions of Italy, and a region that it really didn't know and understand. And it was the South was an agrarian population, and there was a lot of poverty to begin with, and with unification there was even more poverty. So the peasants started rebelling. The government went after the peasants and wanted basically to capture them and imprison them, and if they were males, they would be killed. They did not want any rebellion. So I set my book in this period of time because I wanted to explore my history and the history of my ancestors. And I come from the South, about 10 minutes from the Ionian Sea. And I just wanted to research that area and find out as much as I could. And in my research, I was so fascinated that I thought, I must write about this and illuminate this period. And so I write it from the point of view of 6 main characters. And basically, I chose these characters as representative of people in the South, the different social classes. So this particular reading, you will hear about 2 characters, Gabriella, the peasant, young peasant woman, and Don Simone. He is the priest for whom she works and for whom her father works. And Gabriella has committed a crime against a rich landowner from the north, and she's committed this crime in self-defense. The priest, knowing that she will be imprisoned at best, wants to bring her to a safe hiding place in the woods, in an isolated monastery in the Aspromonte Mountains. I've traveled through these mountains, and they're not that far from my place of birth, about an hour away. And they are dark and mysterious. And going through these mountains to do my research, I just wanted to bring the whole history to life. So I'm going to read a section where Gabriella and the priest are going through the forested area of the Aspromonte in search of this Augustinian monastery for refuge, to put her there. The priest wants her to hide out there. Okay, and I'll begin. Gabriella cringes with every step she takes through the forested mountain path. They've been walking for at least 3/4 of an hour. Her shoes offer little protection from the grizzled roots that occasionally break through the sun-scorched earth. Every coarse pebble strewn across the forest floor feels like a spike. Despite their elevation, the midday August heat is still unbearable. Gabriella's soles are burning. This is what Saint Joan of Arc must have felt like as the flames began to lick the bottoms of her feet, she thinks. She cries out as a sharp stone penetrates the thin flap of sole on her right foot. She lifts her foot, sways, and falls in a heap near a clump of wild sage. Don Simone gasps, "Did you twist your ankle?" Gabriella shakes her head. "My foot's bleeding, though." Don Simone mumbles something under his breath that sounds suspiciously like a curse of some kind, and Gabriella looks at him in wonder. She has never heard him utter a bad word in her life. "Dio, perdonami," he asks immediately. And despite her pain, Gabriella almost feels like laughing. Don Simone, the most holy man she knows, swearing, and then asking God's forgiveness. "We must take care of this right away," he tells her, removing her shoe before it becomes infected. He reaches into his cassock and pulls out a flask. Gabriella looks away and braces herself. She flinches as the alcohol makes contact with her open wound. Her foot feels as if it is engulfed by flames. Shuddering, she attempts to pull her foot away, but Don Simone holds it firmly. She can see that he is trembling, though, and his face looks as pained as she feels. He reaches again into his cassock and produces a handkerchief, which he folds before tying it around her foot. "How can I walk like this?" She winces as Don Simone helps her wedge her foot back into the torn shoe. Don Simone takes a deep breath, his finger tapping one side of his face. "We will rest for a while, but we cannot stay in this spot." He straightens, looks around, and then nods in satisfaction. "See that grove of poplar trees? Beyond is a shepherd's hut. We will stop there. Besides, you need to eat. Come." Gabriella cannot put her full weight on her foot. Leaning against Don Simone's arm, she limps the 30 or so paces to the grove and squeezes through a narrow opening into a field of mixed grasses intertwining in wild profusion. Gabriella can easily identify them: myrtle and rosemary, thyme and fennel, lavender and sage, and the abundant soapwort. The field is so overgrown that at first the hut is easily missed. Don Simone points to it excitedly. "There, I knew it would be there." The door creaks as they enter. He helps Gabriella into a dilapidated woven chair before sitting down on a rough bench. "I come this way occasionally on my travels," he says, taking a couple of apricots and a hunk of cheese from his pack sack. "The shepherd whose hut this belongs to lives on the outskirts of town with his daughter, who works as a housekeeper at a villa in the area. His wife is dead. The fellow always invites me to have a little tipple with him, of tea mostly, when I pass through. He told me to stop in even if he wasn't here, if I needed a rest or goat's milk." Don Simone chuckles. "I imagine he's out to pasture with his goat, or we could have enjoyed some fresh milk." Gabriella accepts Don Simone's offering of fruit. For the first time since they left Camini, she feels hunger gnawing at her stomach. She bites into the apricot, savoring its sweetness. She watches as Don Simone pulls out a jackknife and cuts the pecorino cheese into wedges. He hands her a couple of generous wedges, takes one for himself, and puts the rest in a pack sack. Her foot is still throbbing, but for a moment she allows herself to be content for the food and the rest. Don Simone begins to say grace, but she plops the second apricot into her mouth, ignoring his frown at her obvious disrespect. Whatever respect and devotion she had for God died with her father and her dreams of a life with Tonino. Don Simone excuses himself, and in his absence, Gabriella limps into the adjoining room. A straw pallet is wedged into one corner, and a wicker basket crammed with herbs leans against the wall. She starts as a field mouse appears from behind the basket and skirts the edge of the room before disappearing into a crevice in the dirt floor. She shudders, and despite the heat, feels a flurry of goosebumps skimming down her arms. Her eyes are drawn to a cord that is strung from one side of the hut to the other. She notices the splatters of blood along the cord and a few errant feathers. A pigeon or a quail. Her gaze drops to a bulging haversack on a low bench. Her nose wrinkles at the scent of freshly killed fowl. She prods the bag with her foot, and the twisted head of a pigeon pops out, its white feathers scarlet tinged. So the shepherd is not far off then. The walls of the hut seem to be closing in on her. She hobbles back to the first room and out the door, where she almost collides with Don Simone. He is holding a sturdy oak limb. He drops the limb and holds her steady by the shoulders, peering at her in concern. Your face is as pale as the blessed host. His voice is stern. Perhaps I should have left you with Luciano. It was madness on my part to think that you could withstand such a journey. He wipes the beads of sweat on his forehead and under his eyes. Oh, how I wish we still had my mule, Vittorio, with us. Gabriella was present when Don Filippo advised against it, suggesting a little-known footpath through the Aspromonte mountain range that would bring them to a safe haven, a secluded Augustinian monastery run by a personal friend of his. He mapped it out for Don Simone, assuring him that the forces of law would not venture to penetrate the dense woodlands in the vicinity. Don Simone looked skeptically at the intricately drawn map with its serpentine twists, and after getting a few clarifications from Don Filippo, folded and tucked it into his cassock. Take care of my Vittorio, he smiled ruefully at the abbot. It will take us roughly 2 more hours before we arrive at the monastery of the Augustinians, he says now, his eyes intense. But I cannot, in good conscience, allow you to travel any further until you are feeling better. His eyes drift past her to the hut. We have no choice but to stay here for now. The afternoon heat will kill us both if we set out. Perhaps later, when the sun has gone down, you will be strong enough to go on. No, I don't want to stay here, Gabriella hears herself blurt out. The shepherd has left a bag with some dead pigeons, and he'll surely come back soon. I don't want to be here when he comes back. He might be angry with us for trespassing. He might. She realizes her body is trembling along with her voice, and her eyes meet Don Simone's in silent pleading. Oh, my dear, you have nothing to fear. The old fellow is as old as the Aspromonte mountains. And besides, I am with you. You will come to no harm. Gabriella watches as he extracts his wooden rosary beads from his cassock with one hand. We are not alone, he says, holding them up triumphantly. We have the Lord with us. He will protect us. Gabriella turns away sharply, freeing herself from Don Simone's steadying hand. Don't talk to me about the Lord, she wants to scream. She looks around her in agitation, feeling as trapped as a cornered rabbit. I'm not staying, she says with the calmest voice she can muster. She draws out a long breath, fully aware that this is the first time she has defied Don Simone. Whatever demon has seized her soul to make her act this way, she has no intention of fighting. If anything, she is ready to do battle with the Lord that Don Simone holds so dear. Crossing her arms, she watches as Don Simone blinks helplessly at her. His mouth opens and then flaps shut without a word. He cups his chin with one hand and after a moment nods. Va bene, he concedes. We will go. He stoops down to pick up the limp. Use this to help you walk. He hands it to her and enters the hut to retrieve his pack sack. When he reappears, Gabriella notes that he has also helped himself to the herbs. She spots 2 pigeon claws protruding from an outer pocket of the pack sack. I only took 1, he murmurs sheepishly. We have little food left. May the good Lord forgive me my thievery, he says, eyes lifted to the sky. Gabriella turns away, not wanting to show her surprise. 2 commandments broken in less than an hour. Don Simone has never demonstrated such human weakness before. In one way, she finds it disturbing. She has always thought of Don Simone as a pillar of right action, a man quick to rise above the petty foibles of his parishioners, a man far removed from human indiscretions. Perhaps nothing is as it seems, she thinks bitterly. But then again, if a man of the cloth can justify his sins and seek pardon, then perhaps she can be forgiven for her crime, an act she carried out simply to protect herself. Gabriella wipes the beads of sweat from her face with her sleeve. Her damp collar is pinching her neck and her foot is throbbing. She looks up to the sky, but the midday sun is blinding and she shuts her eyes. No, you are not willing to forgive me, are you, Lord? I must suffer still. There is no justice for peasants like me. Stifling a sob, she begins to hobble back to the mule path. Don Simone walks closely behind her. For the first time, she feels truly alone. Not only has God betrayed her, but the man who has been her second father has let her down as well. Oh, Don Simone will say an extra rosary and pray for God's understanding and forgiveness of his actions in such dire circumstances. His conscience will be appeased. Her conscience, however, will not, for she refuses to ask God's forgiveness for sticking her knife into Alfonso Fantin's thick neck. Damn him, he deserved to die. Don Simone shakes his head sadly at the figure hobbling ahead of him. She has changed already. Gabriella is no longer a tender creature suspended in a safe chrysalis, but one who is hardening in order to survive in the outside world. Her barely restrained defiance of his wishes to stay in the shepherd's hut has caused him some consternation, but he has no desire to cause her further distress. The poor child has had more than her share. Walking at this time of day is unbearable. His black cassock is drawing the sun to him like a flame, enticing a moth. His collar is drenched. Dabbing at his face with a handkerchief, he prays they both have the strength to walk the remaining 2 hours to get to the monastery, tucked away in a dark cleft of the northeastern slope of the Aspromonte mountain range. It is even more elusive than Don Filippo's monastery, accessible only by foot. It has been in use for 3 centuries, attracting the most reclusive of monks and nuns to its perpetually sheltered walls. Don Simone has never had the occasion of visiting it, but Don Filippo is on good terms with the abbot and felt it would be the ideal haven for Gabriella under the circumstances. Gabriella is in pain but wants to go on. So be it. He has no choice but to accompany her and to ensure her safety, although he's not sure what kind of protector he can be if he collapses from heat exhaustion. Unless it is a dire emergency, he never travels about the countryside at this time of day when the sun is at its strongest. Huffing, he catches up to her. She glances at him with a barest hint of a smile, and he utters a prayer of thanks to God for this minuscule sign that perhaps Gabriella's spirit isn't completely dead. Somewhat cheered, he smiles back. Coraggio, he says. We are almost there. And where would there be? A voice rasps behind him. Don Simone pulls Gabriella to him, his heart jolting. Before he can turn around to face the speaker, the man jumps out in front of him and Gabriella, one hand holding a rifle and the other clasping a bulging haversack. the same one that was in the shepherd's hut. This is not a man of the law, but neither is he a shepherd. Don Simone feels Gabriella go rigid. Trying not to show fear in his voice, he nods congenially. Good day, sir. We're heading to the village. My friend, the priest, is in need of a housemaid, and I was accompanying my niece. He has a hard time seeing the man's face under his black conical hat. The sun is throwing shadows across his features, embellishing the slant of his eyebrows, the shape of his mustache. The man is lean and muscular. His shirt sleeves are pulled up, revealing forearms that are dark and sturdy. His pants look a size too big, held up by a rich leather strap decorated with a buckle studded with jewels. The myriad stones catch the sunlight and mesmerize Don Simone for a moment. The man chuckles and looks at Gabriella and then back at him. Don Simone catches his breath. This man is a thief. At worst, a brigand. His grip tightens around Gabriella, a gesture that instantly draws the thief's attention. It is not safe to travel in these parts without some sort of protection, the man says in a concerned tone. There are all manner of villains lying in wait to rob you, or worse. The man takes a step forward and tips his hat. His face is visible now, a slate of hard curves and edges, with eyes and hair as black as charcoal. His nose leans into his thick mustache. It has been broken, perhaps. If not for its awkward angle, the man might be considered almost pleasant looking. Almost. Don Simone notices a pale ribbon around the man's neck, but the pendant is obscured. He wonders if the thief is wearing a sacred amulet of some kind. If he is, perhaps he will show respect to a representative of Christ. You have traveled this way before? Don Simone nods. I've made pilgrimages to the Madonna of the Poppies, he lies, silently thanking Don Filippo for mapping the surrounding area for their journey. Then you will make your way back home. I will take your niece safely to Don Damiano. Don Simone clears his throat, aware that Gabriella's eyes have widened. He feels his stomach muscles clenching, the blood draining from his face, but he is determined not to show his fear to this vigliacco. With all due respect, sir, I have promised my brother that I would not leave his daughter's side. Your offer is much appreciated, but I am afraid I must decline. You are afraid? The thief's eyes narrow into slits. Not enough, I think. He taps the butt of his rifle sharply into the ground. You will turn back at once. Don Simone doesn't know if it is he who is trampling or Gabriella. He desperately thinks of something he can offer the thief, something of worth. He wrenches the only ring he owns from his left hand and holds it out. Please allow me to thank you for your trouble, he says as steadily as he can. He is heartbroken to relinquish the ring, not for its material worth, but for the fact that it was a parting gift from Monsignor Brunello prior to his departure for Calabria. He only hopes it will satisfy the thief. It is a thick band of 24-karat gold with a ruby sunken within an oval silver border. The thief all but snatches it from his outstretched palm and surveys it with interest. He nods and slips it into a pocket of his trousers. It is most kind of you, sacerdote. Don Simone feels a thread of hope. Now go home, the thief rasps. Don Simone gulps. His chest tightens with the terrifying realization that he has nothing with which to protect Gabriella. Nothing. He cannot bear to look at her. And then he has a thought. He lets his arm drop from around her tense shoulders and casually slips his hand into the side of his cassock. He forces himself to take deep breaths as his hand closes around his jackknife, trying to figure out how he can thwart the thief without getting himself or Gabriella shot. Hand it over. The voice is behind him. Another thief. Don Simone makes a quarter turn and sees a figure almost identical to the first thief. The man is shorter, robust, but with the same feature, all nose. This one is wearing breeches with lift-up footwear and no stockings, the same conical hat, and a gentleman's silk shirt. Around his neck, a gold chain above a thick mat of chest hair. in his hand a polished pistol. You heard my brother. Don Simone's shoulders slump. We're finished, he thinks. He hands over his knife without meeting the thief's eyes. Dear Lord, spare Gabriela. He cries out as the brother wrenches him away from her. The first thief leaps to her side and grabs her by the elbow. She begins to struggle, twisting like a filmy leaf in a gust of wind, but her movements come to an abrupt end when the thief's vein-swollen hand slams against her left cheek, leaving a scarlet imprint. Don Simone groans as the thief delivers a blow to her other cheek. Gabriela collapses. Don Simone attempts to rush forward, but the thief's brother holds him back. The villain's eyes are bright with excitement. He gathers Gabriela up in his arms and disappears into a thicket. Don Simone feels the bile thrusting its way up his innards until his throat engorges. He chokes and gasps, and the acrid liquid spurts out in a gush, spraying the brother's chest with a thin yellow film clotted with phlegm. The brother cries out in disgust and slams a fist into his stomach. Don Simone feels himself crumpling to the ground. The brother's bile-splattered face, the last thing he sees before complete darkness. Thank you.
Very nice.
What I forgot to mention at the beginning, Linda, was the peasants who rebelled, because the government was after them, they sometimes had to take to the hills. They had to go into hiding. And these peasants became what is called outlaws, and what the Italians, what they were known as briganti, brigands. So brigands and outlaws is the same thing. And the government didn't care that they were poor, and they were simply, in many cases, trying to feed their families and keep them from starving. They went after them, and they went on a mission to exterminate them. And they employed the forces of law in an actual, basically attempt to wipe them off the face of the earth. So it was a very turbulent period.
Yeah, we have a colorful history around the world, don't we? It's good to know these things, though. It's good to know, it's good to have books like these. Does anybody have any questions about her process or her writing or the story?
I do. Eloise.
Hi, Eloise.
Hi. Rosanna, are you reading from another computer, or are you reading on your hard copy, or what are you reading from?
I'm reading on, what I did was I saved the passage on a file, and I'm reading from my screen. So I have a split screen. So on one side I have the text, and I thought I would try that out because last time I read from my book, but when I read from my book, sometimes depending on the lighting, it's not as bright, and so I thought I'd try reading from the screen this time for this purpose.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was good because we get to see your eyes a little more, which is, it's actually a good idea.
Yeah.
And your expressions too. It was a great read.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I should say that this is based on true facts. So I did many years of research, and at the back of the book,
You freeze.
Huh?
So this book is based on true historical facts. And at the back of the book, I list all the books that I have researched and the primary sources and Italian sources. I read many books in Italian. Some of them were very old, from the 1800s, and so the Italian was even more antiquated. And then I have quite a list of resource books. I thought it was important to put them into the book, because if anybody wanted to explore this period of history a little bit more. And I actually decided to call the village where Gabriella is from after my own village in southern Italy where I was born. So it takes place in Camini, Calabria, a place that's close to my heart.
Mm.
So do you do your research, do you do all your research ahead of time, or do you do it as you go along? Like how do you do that?
Well, my research, Colleen, took place over quite a few years. And so I would research. I filled notebooks with research notes that I took. And, you know, I have many books. And as I read, I would write down. And sometimes after reading a bit and researching, it would give me inspiration to write a chapter. And then I would continue. But as I was working on this book, I was also teaching full-time and part-time and raising children, and also being there for my parents as they became older and had some health issues. And also while I was doing this work, I was also trying to invest in myself as a writer. So I was reading many books about writing. I was taking workshops. I did a couple of sessions at the Humber School for Writers. I went to conferences, and I was writing short stories here and there to send them out to try to build up a publishing history. And I'm actually up to 19 anthologies now. But that was all while I was trying to work on this project. So a lot of things were happening at the same time. And I just kept working at it, knowing that eventually it was going to get done, because it was a project that was so close to my heart. You know, finding...
So how long did it take?
Well, for this project, I actually began researching in 1998. I researched, and then some years I didn't produce as many chapters. For example, the year that my mother had 2 heart attacks, I was there every day. I was there every third night. So I didn't get much done because I was still teaching, and I still was raising children, and so life happens, right? So you know, I was doing everything I could to invest in myself as a writer. So I started, and I eventually finished the book. But even after I finished, I wanted it to have a professional manuscript evaluation. So I had met Barbara Kyle, who was the last guest on Word Up. I'd met her at a conference, and I had submitted my work to her, and she said she would be pleased to look it over when it was completely done. So I did get an evaluation through Barbara Kyle, which I highly recommend. And she gave me some very good insights and suggestions. And I did some further polishing and continued to polish until I got to where I was ready to send it to a publisher. So I sent it to Barbara when in its 3rd draft. When I sent it eventually to the publisher who accepted it, Inanna Publications of Toronto, I sent them my 6th draft. So I kept working on it. And then that's the thing. You polish through editing, and you can't avoid editing. But the end result is worth it.
Oh, that's good advice, actually. I mean, you know, you see these movie writers. I think there was a movie about J.K. Rowling, and they show her, you know, sort of writing the book, and then all of a sudden it's done, and she has I think it's her sister. It's a movie scene, right? But her sister reads it like while she's sitting there watching her in like in like an hour. I don't know. It's not like that. The writing's not like that, and the reading of it isn't like that. So it's good advice. Don't give up. Keep working at it.
That's right. And
get all the help you can get.
Yeah.
Get a writing mentor. That's what I'm looking at doing. So
right. And when you have a few publications, then you can apply for a grant. And so I eventually got an Ontario Arts Council Writers Works in Progress grant for this book, which really was so validating, and it encouraged me to continue and not to give up hope. And actually that was a lesson that I shared with my students over the years. I didn't get it on the first try. And I said it on the second try, so never give up.
Never give up.
This is good advice. Anyone else have any more questions for her?
Thank you all for being here tonight.
I think I'm freezing up.
Was it 1861, Rosanna?
1861 was the official unification of
Okay. Okay.
Italy. However, there were still two areas that had yet to be completely part of Italy. That was Rome and Venice. And so in my book, there's an actual battle that takes place in those Aspromonte mountains that I mentioned, the Battle of Aspromonte, where General Giuseppe Garibaldi, a real historical figure, is in southern Italy trying to round up troops to march north on Rome to liberate Rome from the French garrison that was protecting Rome under Napoleon III. And so it was very interesting history. I really enjoyed researching it all. So that battle is part of my story. And one of the young men who joins Garibaldi happens to be Gabriella's love interest, the young man who pronounces his love for her and his desire to have her as his wife. But then they are separated because of what happens. And he doesn't even know. He doesn't know that what has happened to her as he goes off to join Garibaldi.
Thank you.
Cool. Okay. Well, maybe we should move on to our second author. And if we have any other questions or discussion after open mic, we can continue there if that's okay. So tonight we also have Ray Robertson, who is the author of 8 novels, 4 collections of nonfiction, and a book of poetry. His work has been translated into several languages, and in 2020, he published How to Die, a book about being alive. It's a great title. And The Old Man in the Mirror Isn't Me, Last Call Haiku. He's born and raised in Chatham, Ontario, and he lives in Toronto. So everybody, Ray Robertson.
Can everybody hear me?
I can.
Okay, good. I was muted, so I was trying to. Okay, so you're not going to see my eyes because I'm reading from a book, so you're not missing much. So I was foolish enough to publish not just one book during a pandemic, but 2. So if you're going to be in for an ounce in for a pound, I guess, right? So ordinarily, I tend to write novels, but this year I published a book of nonfiction, How to Die, book about being alive. I'm going to read briefly from that. And then this is kind of a departure. I published a book of haiku because, you know, that's what people want, right? They want haiku. So you got to give the people what they want. So no, it was a lot of fun. I'm going to read briefly from the introduction there and read a few of those. So it's a nice change of pace. We had a novel, we got some nonfiction, some poetry. So there we go. My lighting in here is not too good. I'm reading from my kitchen. So I'm just going to have to do my best here. So this is just from the introduction or near the introduction of How to Die. Oh, I just want to thank the folks for having me. It's important that we do these things. I would rather have done it in person. That would have been nice. It's kind of odd to do it this way, but better than nothing, I guess, right? Also, I see Brian is here, and I can't see his face, but I know Brian. He had me up to Barrie a couple times to read at the high school, and so long time, Brian. I just see your name. I don't see your face, but hopefully you can see mine. Okay, so this is from How to Die, a book about being alive. No one forgets their first time. It's the other first time, the one that darkens the mind rather than delights the body, that isn't always as instantly memorable. But it's there, somewhere, along with the initial recognition from our parent that our parents aren't the wisest, most powerful people in the world who will always be there to protect us. That people don't have to love us back just because we want them to. and that the game of life doesn't come with a set of invaluable rules that everyone is obliged to follow in the interest of fair play. Not that it's difficult to understand why we don't always remember the precise time and place when we first became aware, however dimly, of death, that everyone is going to die, that I am going to die. Human beings tend to hide from what hurts, or at least attempt to. But grandma's funeral, or the family pet's last visit to the veterinarian, or a flattened frog in the middle of the street reminds us again and again of what we try to forget, but never entirely can. Someone once asked me if I was ever tempted to revisit a character or a storyline from one of my novels. I can honestly say that I hadn't, that it sounded too much like work, something I've tried very hard my entire life to avoid. It also sounded boring, which for me is even worse. How can the reader be expected to care if the author doesn't? This changed after I wrote a book called Why Not? 15 Reasons to Live. How to Die, a book about being alive, isn't a sequel to Why Not, but rather a continuation of the conversation begun in the latter book's final chapter, death. A conversation with whom? With myself. I have a tattoo of a skull and roses on my right forearm. Actually, I can show you. Show and tell. I got it because I'm a deadhead of the grateful variety, but also because it's such an apposite image for existence. Encircling the outline of the skull with black holes for eyes is a garland of fresh red roses. Death and life, life and death. If there's a thesis to How to Die, a book about being alive, it's just that if we gain a better understanding of what death is, we'll also know more about what life consists. Montaigne, who I use a lot in this book, he's sort of the guiding spirit of the book, the great French philosopher. Montaigne claimed that, quote, "My trade and my art is my living." Nice work if you can get it. May we all be so profitably occupied. So what I do in How to Die is sort of mix the anecdotal. We all have stories about death, people we know, people we care about, people we love. When I was writing this book, people died. That's part of what happens when you live. But I weave those stories with people throughout history, ancient Greek philosophers, contemporary blues singers, whoever it is, who helped me get a better understanding of what death is. And by extension, I think the book really is about, if we think about our mortality, I think we'll be more focused on our life. Because I think if we tend to ignore the topic, I think we have this sort of, it's part of human nature, and a lot of great writers have talked about this, to believe that we're going to live forever. You know, the writer William Serrar famously said, when he was contacted, when he found he had terminal cancer, his response was, "Well, I knew that everyone had to die, but I thought in my case there might be an exception." That was sort of the way that we think about death. And if we think about it in a way, and I use, as I say, these thinkers and writers and poets, I think that we'll come around to the other side, because the flip side of death is life. So that's what that book is. Probably a terribly skimmed version, but I'm kind of excited to read from this book, because The Old Man in the Mirror Isn't Me. Because I haven't really done any. This book, How to Die, came out in January, thankfully before the pandemic, so I was able to have a proper Toronto book launch and go to lots of cities and do lots of media stuff before everything clamped down. And as you're all writers or readers, you all know it's really hard now to squeeze books into the world that we live in right now. It's so full of so many other things. This book came out a couple months ago, so I guess it's a fall book, late summer book. So I haven't really had a chance to read from this book, so I'm kind of excited. So I'm appreciative of the opportunity. Briefly from the introduction, and then some haikus. So that'll be kind of fun, I hope. About 2 years ago, I started writing haiku. Over the course of these 2 years, I'd seen a novel through the press and written a book of essays and started another novel, but I never stopped jotting down haiku. Sometimes it was even slightly annoying. Sometimes, after a long day's work on a novel or an essay, I didn't feel like being on 24-hour call to my coiled notebook. Sometimes I just wanted to drink some wine with my headphones on and listen to Miles Davis. But I reasoned the wine and the headphones and the music would still be there when the haiku got recorded. And I knew that the tap would likely get turned off at some point, just as suddenly, as inexplicably as it got turned on. What are they, though? They're not technically haiku, clearly, because they don't adhere to the classic 17-syllable structure of a Japanese haiku. Jack Kerouac called his bastardized versions of the form American haikus because he claimed the English language didn't easily adapt itself to the exquisite fluidity of the Japanese language, which is just another way of saying that, like any other undisciplined, acquisitive North American, he borrowed something from antiquity and slapped a new world coat of paint on it to make it his own. The Old Man in the Mirror Isn't Me, Last Call Haiku, is my paint job. So, for the first time anywhere, I'm going to read some haiku, so this is great. Okay. In bed with the flu, reading Gogol's Dead Souls. What day is it? Christmas Eve, stoned, Jesus and his reindeer. That was the first one I thought, there's a book in here, I think. You know, that literally was on Christmas Eve. Wine makes me brave. Wine makes me sad. Brave and sad. In front of the men's shelter, an empty beer can, a half-eaten sandwich in cellophane, a single black sock. I guess what I liked when you were working, I was, listening to Rosanna talk about the process of writing a novel. It's all encompassing, and this kind of felt like I was able to cheat a little bit. I got to be monogamous, but still have an affair. So I got to write haikus whenever I got a little tired of working on the novel. So I did write down what pages I was going to read from here. See, if we were in a bar or something, you'd all be drinking, and this wouldn't be quite so awkward, but okay. There's just so many. I don't know where to start. I wrote this one at a friend's son's bar mitzvah. He doesn't know that. I'm just hoping when the book comes out, he'll see it. Drug addicts, drunks, and merry misanthropes. These were my teachers and my gods. I hope I didn't let them down. I like that one. Shame in the evening, regret in the morning. If there's time, a nap in the afternoon. I like that one too. Okay, 66. Okay, I like this one too. This is my anti-technology poem. Call someone, text something, tweet, tweet, tweet. I like that one. I found that when I was writing these, that the first line always announced itself. I never had to think, this would be a good topic for a haiku, or I'd like to write. It just sort of arrived, and then the mind was there to find the rhythm and the rest of the poem. So in a way, once you had the first sentence, you were cooking with gas, as they like to say. Okay. Page numbers are so small here. I love this one. Sleet storm, tin roof. Who needs Mozart? I wrote this. I don't know if any of you know the fine Canadian poet David O'Meara, but I was doing a reading in Ottawa, and afterward we went looking for trouble, and we found some in a wonderful bar called Irene. So this is a poem about for David, I guess. Saturday night in Ottawa, who gives a shit? Let's call David. Slow Tom is playing at Irene's. Here's one that I think everyone can identify. Well, sorry, my dog just kicked that over. So, everyone's underappreciated. No one gets laid enough. Maybe it's just me. This book to a great degree is about aging and about getting older and sort of being more shocked than disappointed or surprised. And that's where the title comes from. One day I was looking in the mirror, I thought, who is this person? I don't recognize this person, right? And, but it's kind of exciting too. I mean, I don't really have much choice in the matter. I have to get old, so it's kind of fun to just sort of chronicle it. So there's a lot of fun poems in here, but some of them too are there's a lot of people who died when I was writing it, etc. So this is one of those more somber poems. All the colors have bled from my eyes. I slur my hearing and my joints need oiling. It wasn't supposed to be this way. I don't like this zeitgeist. It's never anybody's fault and no one thinks bad thoughts. I did it. I do. I think I'm going to read just a couple more. And this is a poem for myself, I guess. Stay away from whiskey and caffeine. Remember to take your Zoloft and Lextroxin. Always pet strange dogs. I haven't written a love poem. I haven't read a love poem yet. Maybe I should. Oh, no, you know what? I'm going to read a wine poem instead. Too intelligent to be happy, too wise to be sad. He poured himself another glass of wine. So in my fantasy from this book, I'm going to read at some, when we're back in the world and people are around, and I'm going to read, and I'm going to stop and say, no, stop, don't stop reading haiku. Please come back and read more haiku. So I've got my encore haiku here. It's the last poem in the book, which it's very, it's funny. When you write a novel or a book of nonfiction, even How to Die, it's got to have a beginning, middle, and end. All the parts have to talk to each other. At least that's the kind of book I want to read. So it's, as many of you are writers, it's not just page by page, it's how the pages all fit together, etc. So I thought part of my holiday with this book would be, I'll just write a bunch of haiku and, put them together. But no, it had to be a story as well. And this is a story that starts in the spring and ends in the fall. It's about growing aware of mortality, our own and everyone else's. But I wanted it to end on the right note. So I remember when I wrote this poem, I thought, well, when I get uproariously called back on stage, more haiku, please. This is going to be my encore haiku. The Clash is classic rock. All the original Ramones are dead. Hail, hail, rock and roll. So there you go. That was fun. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions? Or yeah, it was very good.
It's different hearing applause online.
Yay. Anyone have any thoughts or questions or about the work or the process or anything?
Or what it's like to publish 2 books in a year where no one cares about books? That's a question. That's a valid question.
I think people care about books now because they're home. I mean, and another Netflixing a lot, but they're reading, like the readers are reading. So
I have a friend who has a bookstore in Hamilton. I was bemoaning, belly aching it, and she said just that they've had real people who wouldn't ordinarily come in, who sort of said, I've watched all the Netflix I can watch. I've done all the home improvements I can do. I used to like to read. Maybe I'll read again. So maybe you're right. That is encouraging, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure I reached the end of the internet and it was kale. So I've got all these books I'm reading. I've got books from my previous word uppers like yourself who've featured for us. I've got all these books I've been trying to get to. I've started a few of them, and I'm writing one of my own. So yay, COVID. Happy COVID.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Is anyone else writing or reading more?
Excuse me?
Is anyone else here writing or reading more?
Oh, sorry.
You're included.
I've had that same experience. I'm actually getting through the pile of books by my bed, which is quite exciting. Same as you, old word uppers, stuff I've picked up at conferences. It's been great, actually. But I did have a question for Ray in terms of have you always written haiku, or would this come out of the blue, or?
Yeah, you know what? It's the introduction to this book. I agreed to put the book together, and then my publisher Barry Callen said, but he's been wanting me to write prose for a long time. He said, well, you got to write an introduction. I don't want to write it. And I ended up writing a 10,000 word introduction. It's my favorite part of the whole book. It's called Why I'm Not a Poet. Because I don't want my poet friends to think I'm really doing that. As I talk about the introduction, it's a great question because I didn't study literature at university. I studied philosophy. And the only thing I really monkeyed around with was maybe, bad poetry like we all do when we're young. And I think that I read some very powerful haiku, tanka, Edgar Lee Masters, Spoon River Anthology, these wonderful pithy poems. But they were just, fun, playing. So since then, no, I have not. I had published 12 books or so, and a couple of years ago. I think it's because I'm always writing, and I don't really have any hobbies. And literally that one night, that one Christmas Eve, when I wrote that poem, Christmas Eve, Stone, Jesus and His Reindeer, and I thought, that's actually not bad. And I wrote it down on by pen, my little notebook. And then a week or so later, a few days later, another line came, and I put another. And then I started putting in my computer, and before long, I had 10, 20, 30. And of course, the beauty of the process is like Rosanna was saying about the revising, was that I was able to learn what I wanted, the sounds, the rhythms I wanted, by just reworking them. So before long, I had 100 and whoever's made the book, 150 in the book or whatever. And it really felt like, it still feels like I've got a novel coming out next fall, 2021, which we'll start working on. We've been working on a little bit, but we're kind of ramp up soon. And we're working on a nonfiction book, but this doesn't feel the same. It feels a little bit like I say, I'm kind of cheating, and so I think this is just something that happened almost out of necessity, because I needed some other place for these very observational, this stuff finds its way into books as well, but it just really felt like a place to put these observations. I think like a lot of us, I'm trying to slow down a bit, be more mindful, and which doesn't really work when you're trying to write all the time. And it almost feels like when I do this, I'm slowing time down a bit, and I think it's been really, I think it's reflected in the haiku. I think a lot of them, I think if people read my novels and then they read these, they might see there's a slight attitudinal change, and I think it's really healthy. So in many ways it is new, but so far I haven't stopped yet, so we'll see how it goes.
I wanted to say, Ray, I just love haiku, and to me they're like little nuggets of observation, of truth. And I just love the whole idea of them. I haven't tried to write haiku, but I think at one point I would love to do that. I wrote down a quote that you had said, Ray, if we think about mortality, I think we'll be more focused on life. And I think that is so true, because over the years you come into contact with other people's mortality, and it really makes you think of your own mortality. And at first it can be scary to think about it, like the finality of it, but also it's an acceptance, right? It's accepting that everybody is going to be going through this, and whether it's when you're 60 or when you're 90, and it's just something that I think is worth reading about. And so I'm really interested in both your works for that reason. Because over the years, I've dealt with that, as we all have, and have several books in my library about dealing with grief, etc., etc. So it is something that I'm very interested in.
One of the nicest things, I think someone asked me, I don't know, CBC or somebody asked me, like, what did you learn about death while you wrote it? Because I think any writer really, one of the reasons you write is to find out what you really think. There's this misconception, you were talking earlier about, the cliches of the writer's life. You were saying, Linda, about I think one of the cliches is that somehow we carry around all this knowledge and then we're going to share it with the world, when most of us are trying to figure out things for ourselves, hopefully in an entertaining, witty, well-written, compelling way. And one of the things that I think was, I don't know if I learned, but was most rewarding was because I was including 2,300-year-old Greek poets, or I was, whoever. As you say, this isn't it feels like a unique experience because it's happening to you. Pretty much everybody who's been here has gone through this, who's not here. And it's rewarding and actually kind of comforting to know that 2,600 years ago, some guy was sitting in his backyard looking up at the stars and thinking, where do I fit into all this? What is it all about, etc. That to me is it's part of the process of what good art does. Of course it entertains, but it also makes us feel that we're connected. Politics is about how we're different, and that's why it's so contentious and difficult. Art, I think, is how we're all the same. And I find it quite reassuring to know that, Emily Dickinson thought the same things that I'm thinking. She was brilliant and I'm not, so she came up with ways of thinking about it. But I feel not quite, I feel a little less alone in the universe knowing that for as long as we've been around, people have been just doing that, thinking about death, thinking about what it means to life. And ultimately, I think How to Die, a Book About Being Alive is about, I think it's an inspirational book, but then, I wrote it, so.
Yeah, I get that. I think we're all brilliant in our own ways, right?
Right.
I mean, we all have the same kind of dots to connect, but they're just maybe we're connecting them in a different order, in a different way.
And that's wonderful, right? That's what gives life its richness.
Yeah.
That you can include, you can listen to, Miles Davis and Horace are saying the same thing in a way, but they're saying entirely different. They're both talking about the ecstasy and the agony of being alive, but one's doing it with a trumpet and one's doing it with words, and that's the glory of art, and that's why it never gets boring, because you have these different perspectives. But I do believe that we're talking about the same things. I'm not a relativist that way. I don't believe in the contemporary idea that somehow, if it's impossible to understand others, then I don't really know what the point of art is, other than just, self-advertising. No, it's expressed and manifested in all sorts of different ways. And that's wonderful. I celebrate that. But I think at heart, we're born, we don't know why, we live, we're not sure why or what we're doing, and we exit, and we're not sure where we're going. And I think good art reflects that.
Maybe we live to find out why we're alive. Maybe that's the point. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think all good books are about that, If not explicitly, then implicitly, that, like why we're here, and what makes for a good life, and what's our responsibility to other people, and do we have, these are, these questions haven't gone away. When I grew up in my small town and moved to Toronto and went to UT and studied philosophy, I eventually lost faith in the philosophy program because they weren't asking the questions that I, as a kid, I was asking. I think they're just as relevant. And the questions really are, how do you live a good life? What is a good life? What is it to be a good person? And so that's why I sort of drifted toward novels when I was finishing my degree, when I sort of lost faith in philosophy, which I talk about in the Why I'm Not a Poet, the introduction to the haiku book. A lot of it is about growing up in Toronto in the 80s and 90s, and sort of moving away from analytical thinking toward more the experiential, which is what art is. Art is what you hear, see, taste, smell, all those wonderful things that make for good writing. A good writer she'll make us feel as if we're there, so that we can participate in the situation, as opposed to a philosopher who's sort of up here talking about life. And I just found ultimately that fiction was actually truer than philosophy. It had more to offer about the important stuff in life.
Who could write the Trump drama and all the stuff going on?
Right. It would take a genius. Yeah.
What you were saying too, Ray, about taking a break from novel writing
Right.
to write haiku, I think that's a very good strategy for a writer, because I found that even with myself, I would take a break from the intensity of researching and writing to work on a children's story.
Yeah, right.
And
right.
having been a kindergarten teacher for many years and loving it and sharing my writing with the kids, it just was a different genre, and you know, it just takes you away, gives you a break from one kind of genre.
Right, right.
And then, you know, I found that with children's books, and also with romance fiction, writing for Harlequin, I enjoyed that too. And it's just a different kind of work and writing.
Yeah,
But I enjoy all three.
Yeah, I think it was, I had pretty much written novels up to 2009. I published a novel called David, but in 2011, Why Not? 50 Reasons to Live. And it seemed like I stand behind the book. It's a wonderful book, blah, blah, blah. But it did feel like I was using certain different muscles. I still wanted my sentences to be, like, sentences are paramount to me. They're all about, a book is about the sentences. But it did feel like I didn't have to create a world. The world already existed, right? I could quote Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and I didn't have to say, well, he stood in the light, and you know. And then when I finished the nonfiction book, I was ready. I felt ready to go back into that world of making up my own rules. And what I've seemed to have done since then is alternate fiction and nonfiction, not out of any sense of discipline or career moves. It just seems like a nice way to let the earth lie fallow a bit. Let it, regurgitate, or not regurgitate, recuperate and grow strong again. And then when I come back to it, it's like, oh yeah, like right now I'm working on a nonfiction, and I'm kind of feeling restricted. I feel like I want the freedom of a novel. And I'm sure when I'm writing a novel, I'll think, geez, all this responsibility, I have to make up everything. If only I was writing about something, you know, and that's life, right? What you have, you want something else and go back. In the meantime,
my favorite tool right now with writing is my phone.
Oh.
Because I am constantly Googling stuff. I think it would take me 10 years to write what I'm writing right now.
Yeah.
If I couldn't just like quickly pick up and go, you know.
Well, I'm old enough to remember
Awesome.
what it was like to write a novel before the internet, and especially when you're copy editing a novel. I mean, you literally, I mean, if a copy editor didn't catch something, you thought, well, is that true? I'm not sure. You'd have to go to the library, unless you had the world's biggest reference section like you do behind you. You know, now you say, oh, well, what year did Heinz Ketchup come on? Boy, you know, because that's really not why I want to do what I'm doing. I want to do other things other than fact check. But it is a remarkable tool. But I found that when I taught, I found sometimes students put the cart before the horse, though. They spent more time researching as a way of avoiding the hard work of making me feel that the people in your book are real people with real concerns, and that's really why we're reading. But the other stuff, yeah, it makes it a lot easier for sure.
Great. Okay, well, I think we're getting close to time to move towards our open mic portion of the evening. We can continue discussion after that. But before that, we have our first monthly sponsor. So we're just going to put up a quick ad, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about our sponsor, who is the Renovation Doctor. He's been in the building industry since 1982. He's given, the Renovation Doctor has been in the building industry since 1982, and has given owner Jim Cable the background to professionally complete your next home renovation. Jim has successfully completed construction on over 300 homes. He has worked in Muskoka, supervising construction on the prestigious Muskokan Resort on Lake Joseph, and in Fergus on the St. Andrews Mill. He is proud to offer his skills and long experience working with homeowners to turn their vision and dreams into reality. They offer complete service from planning and design stages to completion of your project. If you're seeking an addition or just a deck, call the Renovation Doctor for a dependable and professional experience. It's renovationdoctor.com, or you can call them at 719-8472. And if you want to be a sponsor and supporter of the arts, let us know.
Nice.
That's our big ad.
Nice. I'm impressed you have one. That's great.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, our first sponsor. And so, who has something to read tonight for our open mic? I see Marilyn there, big and
Not tonight. And
Night. Maybe
not
I'll see
tonight.
the gallery view. Has anyone got anything for us? I see, is it Kasham? No? Yeah, do you have something to read?
All right.
Unmute. No?
First in line. No one wants to go first.
Who else do we have?
Well, don't. It feels like you're calling on the students by name. I'm empowering. I wouldn't want to be called on. Don't call on me.
Do we have nobody who wants to do open mic tonight?
Well, I think everybody knows that the football season starts in 10 minutes. We all want to.
Well, there you go.
Oh, okay.
That's where I'm going anyway.
Well, I've got a poem.
All right.
Maybe I'll do my poem. And if someone changes their mind, they can be next. So the poem was inspired. Last night I'm a nighthawk. So last night I just happened to be walking by the kitchen window and I saw 3 deers, like good healthy sized deers walking down the street just on my lawn. And they kind of disappeared very quietly, kind of into the night across the street. There were no cars. It was about like 20 after 1 in the morning. And I thought, wow, it was magical. And usually my head is either on Netflix or I'm typing or writing or reading something at that time of night. So I called it Out There. It's not very long. A silent moment in a dark night, looking out my picture window. 3 gentle deer meander quietly down the street. I feel the glory of a moment I would usually miss. Privy to a wild world on the other side of this thin glass. Birds in flight, squirrels forage and scurry tree to tree. Chipmunks fill cheeks. Coons and skunks make Swiss cheese of my lawn. A fox runs under the streetlight, away from a coyote, scruffy, lean, and tall. The circle of life, circle the private bubble I nest in, hiding from a contagion. The alpha in our wheel, I burrow deeper and open my eyes at my picture window. I look within as I separate myself from all as I have from the wild out there. That's my poem.